Things you are not responsible for. We're going to talk about 10 of them today. And the reason why we're talking about this, because it comes on the heels of a post that I had put up on Instagram that I will put the link to below. And several people asked me to expand on the post that I had put up there and actually do a video on it to help a lot more of these things make a lot more sense. So that's what we are going to do today and talk about 10 things that you may be taking responsibility for that you are absolutely not responsible for. And taking responsibility for them is likely at the root of a lot of your stress, your anxiety, your even anger or overwhelm. So we're going to clear these ones out and get you feeling better starting today. If you're new here, welcome to our amazing little corner on the internet. If you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel. The subscribe button is right down there, and that way you'll be sure to get notified when I release a new video, which I do really regularly. Regardless, my name is Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a master coach, and the creator of the Breakthrough Coaching Program. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I work to help heart-centered go-getter men and women break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And these things that we are taking responsibility for that we do not need to take responsibility for. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a rule of thumb before we get right into these things. But just if you're ever kind of confused and if you're ever not really sure about what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for, think of it like this. You are responsible for the things that are in your control. You are not responsible for the things that are not in your control, which when we think about it like that, it makes a lot of sense. You can't be responsible for something that you don't have control over. That is just a recipe for a whole lot of frustration and discouragement and feelings of helplessness because we have no control over it. So let's get right into these ones and talk about these specific things that many of us take responsibility for that are not ours to take on. And the first one is other people's thoughts. We are not responsible for other people's thoughts because we cannot control other people's thoughts. And so often we try to control other people's thoughts. We try to get them to think certain things. My people pleasers, you are really into this one, trying to control other people's thoughts so that they will think about you a certain way. And you know what it is costing you. And then the next thing that we're not responsible for is other people's feelings. And this is a really tough one because I think most of us believe that we can make someone feel bad or mad or sad or glad. But do you know what creates an emotion in a human being? Their thoughts. Their thoughts create their feelings. It's not the things around us that are creating our emotions. It's our thoughts about the things around us that are creating our emotions. And so if we go back to the first one, back to number one, and how we are not responsible for someone else's thoughts, then by proxy, we can also not be responsible for their feelings. Now, this doesn't mean that we just run around being big jerks and treating people however we want and not caring about anyone else and being like, that's their problem, which yeah, it is. If they have a problem with something that we're doing, it is their problem. But a couple things are going to happen there. It's not going to feel good for us to be running around being jerks all the time. That doesn't feel good. In my experience, it doesn't feel good to be a jerk. And then the second thing is, we are going to find ourselves being really lonely if we have no regard for anyone else. Because yes, it is their problem if they don't like it, but it'll become our problem if they don't want to be around us because we are treating them like crap. So finding that middle ground, finding that reasonable place where we are respectful of other people, but not responsible for their thoughts or their feelings. And then the next thing you're not responsible for is guessing someone else's needs. And now those of you who struggle with people pleasing, this is going to be a big one for you because you're going to want to guess what someone else needs so that you can meet their needs and make them happy. And do you see how, from what we learned about how we can't make someone else happy, how that whole logic, that whole structure is really founded on some shaky ground? Trying to guess someone else's needs and the amount of stress and anxiety that it causes us trying to read their minds is not a sustainable strategy. If someone else has a need, it's up to them to communicate that need. And if they don't, we are allowed to leave that with them. But that also brings us on to the next one, which is you are also not responsible for meeting all of anyone else's needs. Even if they do communicate their needs, even if they tell you specifically what they need, it is still not your job to meet their needs. You have your own backpack to carry. You cannot take on another one without it crushing you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be there for someone, that you can't help them out, that you can't be supportive of them, but essentially, their needs requirement is up to them to meet. You can help out, but you don't have to. And you definitely don't have to do it for them. I have heard people say, especially in like marriage relationships, in partnerships, it's my partner's job to meet my needs. And when I hear that, I almost want to spontaneously combust because it is so not true. That is so codependent and so unhealthy to put the responsibility for your happiness and the meaning of your needs and what is important to you in your life, to put that on somebody else. Do you see how unhealthy that is, how unhelpful that is? And the next thing that you're not responsible for is guessing someone else's needs. And for those among you who struggle with people pleasing, this is going to be a big one for you. Trying to guess someone else's needs so that you can meet their needs and make them happy and make them think certain things about you that you want them to think, which brings us back again into the you're not responsible for someone else's thoughts and feelings. And so what we end up doing is stressing ourselves out, making ourselves almost crazy, trying to guess what someone else's needs are so that we can make them happy, so that we can feel good that we made someone else happy. But do you see how the whole thing is just all a big mess? If someone has a need, it is up to them to communicate that need. It is not up to you to guess what their need is, because last time I checked, most of us are not mind readers. Most of us do not have the gift of telepathy yet. And until we do, we can't guess someone else's needs, which then ties in very nicely to the next one. Even if someone does communicate their needs to you, it's also not your job to meet all of their needs. Yes, in relationships, we are there for each other. There's codependence, not a good thing. Total disconnect, not a good thing, but interdependence, where both people are looking out for each other, but there shouldn't be stress and anxiety and walking on eggshells in a healthy relationship like that. You shouldn't be wondering if something that you're going to accidentally do is going to set that person off, or they're going to be upset that you didn't do something that they were wanting you to do or thinking that you should do. That's not healthy. If that's going on in your relationship, that is not a good sign. And it's a really common thing. I think I've heard people say, especially in like marriage relationships, it's my partner's job to meet my needs. First of all, they've also said it's my partner's job to guess my needs, and then saying it's my partner's job to meet my needs. And that is not true. That is actually a load of crap. It's their responsibility to meet their own needs, and they can communicate those needs, and you can decide whether or not you want to help them with that, but it's not your responsibility. The next one is you're not responsible for other people's opinion about you. And this is a really hard one. I think for many of us, we want everyone to like us. And we stress and obsess about things that we did or things that we said, or how we're going to show up in a certain situation, what people are going to think about us, what people are thinking about us, because we want everyone to think good things about us. And I'm curious, why do we need everyone else to think good things about us? Why do we need other people's approval or permission to feel good about ourselves, to believe in ourselves? And I think that's so much of where it comes from, is that we are looking for that permission. If everyone likes me, then maybe I can feel good about myself as a person. If everyone approves of me, then maybe I'm doing all right. But that is also not a sustainable strategy, because then our happiness and well-being and our self-esteem and our sense of self-worth is going to be in the hands of other people instead of allowing other people to not like us. And the same thing is true in the reverse. Like, there's people that you don't like. There's people that are not your cup of tea. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means that you don't have a connection with them. So allow other people to not feel connected to us. It's not personal. It can't be personal, especially if they don't even know you. It can't be personal because they are making a judgment based on something on the surface. And so just allowing other people to have their own opinion. And we're going to talk about this more in the next video. We're going to talk about things that you are responsible for. But in this vein, you are only responsible for your intentions. You're responsible for how you are showing up, but you're not responsible for how people take that. And it was actually really interesting because on one of my recent videos, there was someone in the comment section who at that point, the video had about 10 thumbs down. And this person in the comment section said, it was really like sweet and lovely of them. They were like, whoever those 10 people are that gave the thumbs down, they need to rewatch this video and just really listen, because there's no reason why there should ever be a thumbs down in this video. And I replied to the guy and I said, you know what? It's okay. People are allowed to not agree with me. They're allowed to not like me. They're allowed to not want this information. They're allowed to not be ready for this information. And that's okay. That's actually none of my business. What is my business is being sure that I am being pure with how I am showing up. That I'm showing up to help and to serve and to give people tools to make them feel better, to make their lives better. And that's my intention. And how somebody else receives that is absolutely up to them. So letting how people receive you be absolutely up to them. The next thing that you are not responsible for is making other people happy. As we talked about before, you're not responsible for their feelings. You're also not responsible to make them happy if it's your parents, if it's your partner, if it's your local paleontologist. I don't care who it is. And for a lot of us who are still sort of intertwined with our parents, even as grown-ups, for a lot of us, we're still trying to make our parents happy. We're still trying to get their approval. We're still trying to fulfill their expectations. And so many of us are kind of pushing our own selves and our own lives aside because we are going so after trying to make them happy. But as we talked about before, we can't. And for a lot of you who have tried to make your parents happy, and I'm guessing that you've probably even had this exact same conversation with someone thinking, I'm doing everything and I did this and my parents expected that and I thought it would make them happy, and they weren't even that happy. They didn't even really say anything about it. Or they just looked for the flaws and the areas that I fell short. And the bar went up and their expectations went higher. No matter what I do, I can't make them happy. And if you have ever said that sentence, no matter what I do, I can't make them happy, this is going to be the case with every single person in your life. No matter what you do, you cannot make them happy because you can't make someone else happy. And then the next thing you're not responsible for is fixing other people's problems. And this is an issue for two reasons. Because first of all, if you try to fix their problems and try to give them all the advice and all the suggestions and do all the things for them, often you're going to be met with resistance. They are going to come back with, yeah, but, or that's not going to work, or I've tried that and that's no good. And then you're going to end up feeling frustrated and discouraged. Yeah? Has that ever happened to you where you've tried to fix something for someone and they keep giving you pushback, they keep giving you excuses, and you're like, what is going on? I'm trying so hard to fix this for them and they're not interested. And usually, yeah, that is the way it works. So allowing other people to take responsibility for their own lives, being supportive, being encouraging, listening to them, helping them come up with solutions to their problems is usually a lot better strategy. But we also don't even have to do that for everyone. We don't have to take anything on that we don't want to take on or that we don't have the capacity to take on. Oftentimes we're dealing with our own stuff and trying to figure out our own stuff and don't always have the space to be taking on other people's stuff. And so knowing when we're available for that and when we're not available for that and respecting that. And then the second thing that happens when we try to fix other people's problems is that we end up kind of feeding the beast. And so if someone is always doing the same behavior, the same unhealthy behavior, and we keep coming in and we fix it for them, then they are actually not the ones with the problem. We are the ones with the problem because we are the ones who are taking on all the stress and all the burden and all the stuff of trying to fix their problem. And they're like, I am great. I can do whatever I want. And someone else is going to come and clean it up for me. I don't have a problem. And I think about this, and this is just a really sort of superficial example, but my parents are notorious for being overpackers. They pack, so I don't even know what they have in there. I do kind of know what they have in there, but it is a lot of stuff. And I remember about 10 years ago, we were all traveling in Europe together. And if you've ever been to Europe, and unless you have your own kind of personal chauffeur or valet service for wherever you're going, it's typically not a great strategy to pack a lot of stuff because everything there is small, it's compact, there's not elevators everywhere, everything is just kind of cramped, especially in cities like Paris and Rome. And my parents packed a lot of stuff. And I could tell in a lot of situations, they were kind of struggling to take their own bags, to kind of maneuver through the cobblestone and up the curbs and carrying their suitcases up the staircases into the apartment that we were staying at. And as much as I wanted to be able to help them, and I could see that they were struggling, yeah, I did help them somewhat, but to drop everything, to take on the responsibility for their packing was not mine to take on. I had my own suitcase to carry. I had my own stuff to manage, and I had mindfully packed enough that I could manage on my own. And yes, in that situation, I did help them out somewhat. I didn't take it all on. I didn't feel responsible for taking it on, but also then talked to them afterwards and said, hey, do you think that next time you travel somewhere like this, it might be a better idea to pack more mindfully? And they have. They've actually done a lot better. Every time we travel, I have basically put it out there and said, I've got my own stuff to carry. I'm not available to carry yours, so I need you to only pack what you can manage. Using that metaphorically and literally in this situation, but also using that metaphorically in your own life. You can communicate that with someone. I have my own stuff to carry, so I'm going to ask that you take responsibility for the amount that you can carry, because do what you want to do. I mean, they don't have to take responsibility for how much they can carry, but you're allowed to put your boundary in and you're allowed to say, you do whatever you want to do, but this is what I'm available for. So you make your choice knowing that I am not available to come in and take over and fix it for you. Make sense? Those boundaries, they're going to get you. The next thing that you are not responsible for is reading other people's minds. How often do we go through life trying to know what someone else is thinking about us, about anything? And we are trying to figure it out. We're trying to guess it, but we can't read someone else's mind until telepathy is a real thing. it's not going to work out well. And so this comes back to both, anticipating other people's needs or trying to guess other people's needs, which it's their responsibility to communicate their needs, and then also trying to guess their opinion about you, which is really, again, none of your business. Trying to read their minds. You can't do it. What you can do is be mindful and be responsible for how you are showing up in your life, the choices that you are making. And we're going to talk more in my next video about all the things that you are responsible for. But reading other people's minds is not one of them, because it's not rocket science. You can't. The next thing, we mentioned this a minute ago, it's not your job to set other people's boundaries for them. It is actually up to them to take responsibility for their own lives. Yes, you can help them out, you can be supportive, but you are also allowed to not try and guess and anticipate where their boundaries are. You don't know what's okay with them, and everyone has different boundaries about what's okay with them and what's not okay with them. And so trying so hard to guess what their boundaries are, to not accidentally step over their boundary, well, that's not up to you, because that's going to make you a whole lot of stressed out, instead of trusting that as long as you are taking responsibility for how you are showing up and trying to be respectful and responsible for that, you don't know what of that is going to be crossing someone's boundary. And so it is their job to communicate their boundaries in a respectful and responsible way to you if you accidentally cross that boundary, and being okay, not being so wildly offended if someone does set a boundary with us. That is a good thing. If someone sets boundaries with us, it is a good thing, because often what happens, the alternative to that is that someone doesn't set their boundaries and we keep doing things unintentionally that are bothering them, that are pushing them, that are getting to them, and then they don't know what to do about it. They don't say anything about it. And then all of a sudden they ghost us or drop off the face of the earth, or might even blow up at us out of nowhere, because they've let it build and build and build. And so they either explode or they leave. And we're like, what? I didn't even know that I had been crossing their boundaries. And so it is up to them to communicate their boundaries. A responsible adult will learn where their boundaries are and communicate them in a responsible way. The next thing, you are not responsible for any of someone else's choices. Their choices, their lives are up to them. You can't make someone do something. Just like they can't make you do something, you're not responsible for their choices. They are responsible for their choices because they are the only ones who have any control over their choices. And so letting them make their choices and not taking that on. You got to be responsible for your own choices. You can't be responsible for someone else's. Boundaries. Is this something that you struggle with? Saying no, not taking things on, saying no externally or even just internally, having our own boundaries and allowing ourselves to say no to these things, like reading someone else's mind, taking responsibility for their feelings, trying to guess and meet all of their needs. Also, like having boundaries around that stuff. Those are internal boundaries. Those are important too. But if the external boundaries, allowing yourself to say no to things on the outside, is something that you struggle with because you worry about offending or upsetting one, which you can't, but I do have a free download, 25 ways to say no. Grab that. It's going to really help you start to get more comfortable with setting boundaries, saying no to things. I'm going to put the link in the description below. Like the video, share it out if you thought that more people need this information. Let me know if you do, share it in the comment section below so that I can thank you. Which one of these connected with you? I would love to hear. Come and join my Facebook group, goodformegroup.com. So good to have you here. And until next time, take good care.